the big controversy of the weekend is that Justice Brett Kavanaugh was eating a steak dinner over at Mortons, and a bunch of people arrived outside Morton's steakhouse in order to harass him. According to Politico, on Wednesday night, D.C. protesters targeted the conservative Supreme Court justices who'd signed on to the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade. They got a tip that Brett Kavanaugh was dining at Morton's downtown D.C. location. Protesters showed up out front, called the manager to tell him to kick Kavanaugh out, and later tweeted that the justice was forced to exit through the rear of the restaurant. Daniel Lippman looked into the incident and confirmed that account for Politico. While the court had no official comment on Kavanaugh's behalf, and a person familiar with the situation said he did not hear or see the protesters and ate a full meal but left before dessert. Morton's was outraged about the incident. A representative for the chain steakhouse sent Lippman this statement: Honorable Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh and all of our other patrons at the restaurant were unduly harassed by unruly protesters while eating dinner at our Morton's restaurant. Politics, regardless of your side or views, should not trample the freedom at play of the right to congregate and eat dinner. There's a time and place for everything. Disturbing the dinner of all of our customers was an act of selfishness and void of decency. Okay, so is there a quote-unquote right to congregate and eat dinner? There's no constitutional right to congregate and eat dinner. There is a right to be free of harassment. And if people come up and assault you while you are at dinner, assault is where they yell at you in a threatening manner. Battery is where they hit you. If somebody comes up to you at dinner and they're threatening you in some way, then obviously that is illegal under every local law. Does it violate the common boundaries of decency to arrive at a restaurant and harass people out of restaurants? Absolutely. Of course it does. And we all used to understand this. There have been some pretty significant political disagreements in this country. But it's pretty rare that people just go around looking for people who are at dinner and harass them. It's something we saw during the Black Lives Matter riots. You'd see people who are just eating dinner normally, like at a DC restaurant, and people would walk up to them and start harassing them at dinner and drinking their drinks and bothering them. Is that something that is good for the country? Now, the left immediately jumped on the fact that Morton's had suggested that there was a right to congregate and eat dinner to suggest, what are they whining about? After all, this is about abortion. I mean, and when it's about abortion, that means that you can bother people. According to the 47th Amendment to the United States Constitution, if we go to steakhouses and harass 5 of the 9 justices, then our abortion rights come back. That must be the math here. Now, the real math here is that you guys are all acting like a bunch of jackasses. The Supreme Court ruled. They've ruled a bunch of ways I don't like. I've never once suggested in the aftermath of, for example, Obergefell, which is a wildly unconstitutional decision, I've never suggested that it was in the interest of the United States for right-wingers to go and harass Ruth Bader Ginsburg while she was having dinner at like the Capitol Grill. It's a ridiculous suggestion. And yet the entire left has now signed on to it because they are in the midst of a moment of impotent rage in which they've finally been asked to defend their own positions in terms of democratic voting. They're actually going to have to explain to people why abortion until birth should be the law of the land and why people should vote for that and why they should vote for them based on that. They're so damned angry that they're actually going to have to justify their positions, that now they've decided that the most important thing is, in a sort of radical, impotent rage, they're going to just yell at people. And this is a good thing. It's an actively good thing to randomly yell at people at restaurants. This is going to magically fix everything. Morton's, of course, started getting hit for the very suggestion that they don't want forget about Kavanaugh, they don't want their other patrons to be forced out of the restaurant because they're a bunch of crazy protesters out front. It ruins their dinner too. But apparently, the way that the left sees it, corporate America must always simply bow to all of their whims and do all of their work. So, according to Politico, about a day later, when a corporation is getting grilled on social media, there's a lot at stake. It's punny. The best course is often to say nothing, lest you butcher the response. Issuing a statement can often just inflame things because, let's be honest, press releases are a medium rarely well done. Yes, it's super punny when your entire business is put at stake by a bunch of jackasses who are standing and braying outside your restaurant and bothering all the patrons so nobody wants to go. Morton's, the steakhouse, learned that the hard way this week when it steered right into the middle of the culture wars. Morton's didn't do anything. Morton's was just a steakhouse serving steak. And then we don't like that people are bothering people who are eating steak at our restaurant. And according to Politico, this is them steering into the culture wars. Because according to the left, you're not engaged in culture wars when you just repeat the radical leftism of insane people. But when you say no, that's you engaged in a culture war. This is the common theme from the left media. If you say that there must be abortion on demand and transing of the kids, this means that you're not engaged in a culture war. This is just normal, everyday, rote action. If I say no to any of that, now I'm engaged in a culture war. So Morton's is the problem here. Because Morton said, we don't like the people who are harassing our patrons. After abortion rights protesters showed up in front of Morton's in downtown D.C. on Wednesday night to demonstrate, while Justice Brett Kavanaugh dined inside, the company issued a statement to Politico's Daniel Lippman, and everybody in the media went nuts. Everybody in the media went insane. How dare Morton's say these things? How dare Morton's suggest that there is a need for people to be able to dine without being yelled at their restaurants? According to Scott Crane, the SVP and COO of Morton's, he said, Currently, we're experiencing a massive wave of negative response to our comments yesterday, as well as being bombarded at the local level with phone calls and fake reservations on Open Table. There's a good chance your restaurant will also potentially have some people reaching out for comment and or making bogus reservations over the next few days. As I stated yesterday, our comment is always no comment. We don't respond, we don't retweet, we don't post on Instagram or Facebook, don't do anything. Please remind your teams, especially the our employees, of this policy. Again, we do not insert our political beliefs at any time, not with an employee, not with a fellow manager, not with a guest. And the fact that this is considered the controversial part is where Morton's is like, we just want people to be able to eat dinner at our restaurants. It demonstrates how insane the left has become. If they think this is going to win them friends and influence people, yelling at people at restaurants, good luck to them. But you can see that the blue checks were gleeful about that. They love it. They love the harassment of their political opponents. It's their favorite thing because they don't give a damn about institutions. They don't give a damn about civic norms. They don't give a damn about decency. I mean, I remember when they were cheering when Sarah Huckabee Sanders was thrown out of a restaurant for the great crime of being Sarah Huckabee Sanders. They love this sort of stuff. Making life unlivable for people you disagree with is apparently a hallmark of the mainstream left. And I say mainstream left because it's approved all the way on up to the top of the White House. You can look at some of the tweets from some of the geniuses. Ryan Riley, in which a steakhouse accidentally serves up Twitter red meat. I mean, it's an amazing... Ryan Cooper. Next year, the Supreme Court is going to rule 6-3 that Oliver cannot have some more. Ryan Cooper of the week. Bradley Moss. Sorry, under the originalist reading of the Constitution, there is no right to eat dinner. The founding fathers never spoke of a right to eat dinner, and therefore the right does not exist. Well, first of all, you idiots, there is right to association. And that's been part of constitutional jurisprudence since the origins of the Republic. But beyond that, you're right. There is no federal right to quote-unquote eat dinner. That's why it's been delegated to the states to prevent harassment of people in their precincts. Jamel Bowie said the right to eat dinner in peace sounds like an unenumerated right to me. Are we sure those actually exist? Well, first of all, I wasn't aware that Mortons the Steakhouse was the Supreme Court of the United States, or that what they meant was that there is a constitutional right to eat dinner in peace. There is, however, a right to be not assaulted. That's a thing. That right to be not assaulted, that exists at the state level, it exists at the local level, it exists at every level. Eli Mistal, who's legitimately the worst legal commentator in America. He said, imagine lying to a Congress and the American people to get an unaccountable job for life, getting that job, using your unaccountable power to take away rights, then getting pissy the people you hurt interrupted your ice cream. So first of all, Kavanaugh hasn't even issued a statement. Morton's issued a statement. But also, I love that he describes the role of a Supreme Court justice, and then he's like, but you're pissy that people are yelling at you in public. Jill Filipovich, another legal idiot of the left, says, you all do know that for decades, anti-abortion protesters have swarmed abortion clinics, alternatively counseling them, please don't kill your baby, you're a mother already, and screaming at them, calling them murderers, baby killers, etc. Well, first of all, I wasn't aware that Morton's was an abortion clinic. I wasn't aware that anything was happening at Morton's other than people eating dinner. That seems like a difference in kind from an actual place where you believe that a baby is being killed inside. That seems like slightly a different context. And then, of course, you have the irrepressibly moronic Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who tweeted out on this score as well. She tweeted about Justice Kavanaugh. Two things. She said, quote, poor guy. He left before his souffle because he decided half the country should risk death if they have an ectopic pregnancy within the wrong state lines. It's all very unfair to him. The least they could let him do is eat cake. First of all, they're such liars. Roe versus Wade has nothing to do with ectopic pregnancy. There's not a state in the United States that bars a D&C for an ectopic pregnancy. That does not exist. So they just have to make things up, because if they actually talk about what most abortions look like, people realize that's pretty ugly. Then she says, I will never understand the pearl clutching over these protests. Republicans send people to protest me all the time, sometimes drunk and belligerent. Really? Do they? I feel like that would make social media a lot more. I feel like if you were out to dinner with your boyfriend and his bare feet and people just started harassing you at dinner on a routine basis, I feel like we'd hear about that from AOC a little more. Nobody cares about it unless it's a Republican in a restaurant. Can someone please explain the obsession, because I don't get it? These people are so tiresome. But they're making the country actively worse. And it's the entire Democratic Party, all the way on up to the top. So, for example, Karine Jean-Pierre was asked by Peter Doocy about the fact that there were people arriving outside of a steakhouse to bother a justice and his family. But we should mention here, someone literally attempted to kill Justice Kavanaugh about 5 weeks ago. Someone is arrested for arriving at Kavanaugh's house with weapons and goods meant to harm and silence his family. And that person was arrested. So there was an assassination attempt on a sitting Supreme Court justice like 5 weeks ago, a little over a month ago. And these people are like, yeah, you know, we should probably just encourage people to find Brett Kavanaugh wherever he is and bother him. And the other Supreme Court justices, Karine Jean-Pierre, White House press secretary, anybody who pretends that these folks care about institutions, they do not. They do not give one good damn about institutions. These are the same people who complain ceaselessly about January 6th. I also think January 6th was a really bad thing. It turns out, you know what I don't like? I don't like when people violate the law and harass lawmakers and try. I thought, by the way, forget about January 6th. I thought it was bad when there were people who were going into bathrooms and following Kyrsten Sinema, the senator from Arizona, Democrat, into bathrooms to try to harass her into voting in favor of Joe Biden's Build Back Better bill. I generally think that harassment of people is a bad thing. Apparently the left does not. And when I say apparently, I mean clearly. Here's Karine Jean-Pierre approving the idea that, it's probably a good thing, generally speaking, if people go to justices' houses, they've already said that, or go to restaurants, follow justices around. By the way, the purpose of a Supreme Court is to be insulated from public pressure. And here you have the White House openly calling for it.
Peaceful protest, people should be allowed to be able to do that.
In a restaurant?
If it's outside of a restaurant, if it's peaceful, for sure.
Really?
Peaceful protest. Your first question to me was intimidation.
So these justices, because protesters do not agree with an opinion that they signed on to, have no right to privacy, is what you're saying.
But Peter, this is people have the right to, this is what a democracy is. People have the right
to privacy?
Of course people have a right to privacy, but people also have a right to be able to protest peacefully.
So if this is the new rule of the left, then you know what? Turnabout is fair play. Turnabout is fair play. So I look forward to a much worse country in which every public official of every stripe is protested outside of their restaurant, in which everybody's house is picketed. Because apparently the White House is in favor of it. So what that means is that presumably Karine Jean-Pierre, you can go outside her house and you can picket it. After all, that's free speech. When she's at dinner, you can go outside. I mean, she's a bad press secretary. You can go outside her place of eating and you can yell at her outside. That's just free speech. And Pete Buttigieg says as much. The Secretary of Transportation, professional useless person, Pete Buttigieg, couldn't fill potholes in South Bend, Indiana, can't do anything about the supply chain, can take a 2-month paternity leave where nobody even notices that he's gone. But, important person because he's gay. Pete Buttigieg, that guy, he literally says that it's totally fine with him if people, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. It's all good. Here's the thing. The Democratic Party loves this position. This is their favorite position because it demonstrates ire. It demonstrates anger. It doesn't matter that it's all performative and it gets nothing done and it's actually wildly counterproductive. That if you're a Democrat and you want to, quote unquote, enshrine Roe in law, what you're going to need to do is convince people not to go outside restaurants and yell at them and bother them and go outside their houses as they have with Amy Coney Barrett or Justice Brett Kavanaugh. That doing that's actually counterproductive and stupid. No, it's a good thing, according to the because it shows passion, guys. See, this is the thing, is that for the left, the people who are criminally rioting during 2020, the problem with them is really not that they're criminally rioting. They're just too pure. They just are. I mean, they've just taken it a little too far, but their basic ideology, which is disrupt, make life worse, it's good. It's necessary. Pete Buttigieg just basically says that openly on Fox. This is trending on Twitter because the left loves this so much, this particular clip of Pete Buttigieg. This is supposedly Pastor Pete being a very decent and wonderful person and making fine-toothed distinctions between protests and harassment and all of this. Somehow I feel like if the shoe were on the other foot, nobody on the left would be quite so sanguine about this, which means that there will be a shoe on the other foot. So here is Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg suggesting that it's totally fine to harass people at restaurants. What's the big deal?
Are you comfortable with protesters protesting when you and your husband go to dinner at a restaurant?
Protesting peacefully outside in a public space? Sure. Look, I can't even tell you the number of spaces, venues, and scenarios where I've been protested. And the bottom line is this. Any public figure should always be free from violence, intimidation, and harassment, but should never be free from criticism or people exercising their First Amendment rights.
Okay, except that whenever you say a mean word to a Democrat on Twitter, that is violence and harassment. And whenever you go outside a justice's house with a gun, apparently, that's just free speech. I mean, it really is incredible how these folks are willing to degrade the public space in order to demonstrate passion so they can run to the left in their base. That's really what this is about. This is all part of a broader effort on the left by particular politicians to demonstrate how angry they are. Because so much, again, of our politics is performative. The reality is the Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade. Now it goes back to the state level. And Democrats could work at the state level to get what they want enshrined in law. They could. Instead, what they've decided to do is yell at Joe Biden and yell at the White House and scream at the sky and yell at Brett Kavanaugh. And all of this makes them better people. It's all performative woke bullcrap. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date with all our future content.